Welcome to a new episode of the Digital Adoption Show. I'm Gokul Suresh, Head of Growth and Field Marketing at WhatFix and the host for this episode. Our guest for today is David James. You might know him from the Learning and Development podcast, which is one of the most popular podcasts in L&D and HR space. And he has more than 20 years of experience in people development, talks a lot about contemporary L&D practices, is a current chief learning strategist at the 360 Learning and Loop.co. That's Loop with 3 O's, right? And prior to this, David had a long stint at the Walt Disney Company, where he was a director of talent, learning, and organizational development, handling about 14 different lines of service across EMEA region, right? And yeah, let me take a halt there. David, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Gokul. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah. So first of all, how does it feel like, being at the other end of the podcast, right? Being the one who answers the questions?
There's a lot less pressure on this side, Gokul. So I'm looking forward to enjoying this one.
Yeah, let's just have a fun conversation. And awesome. All right, thanks, David. So let's get to the real deal. So background for the audience: we approached David with the intent of learning more about his podcast, right? And then we realized David himself has a lot more to talk about anything that's there on his podcast, and this 20 years of experience is a lot, right? And so a few topics we'll touch base today is one, how David's experience has been with leading L&D at the ginormous Walt Disney Company, and his shift from enterprise to solving L&D problems at startups, right? And how he created one of the most popular L&D podcasts, the Learning and Development podcast. That's as simple as it is, right? And the new strides, that's bringing in global L&D leaders in the L&D collective community, right? How does that sound, David? Too many things?
That sounds great. Yeah, let's go for it.
Okay, awesome. All right. So first up, your L&D and HR journey, right? So you started off with NatWest and then Lehman Brothers and then a long stint at Walt Disney. So what were they like? All 3 giants. So there'll be plenty of things to talk about how you defined L&D for these organizations, right?
Yeah, thanks, Gokul. So my journey started just before NatWest. So I joined Lloyd's TSB in their credit card function, and my first experience of learning and development at all were the awesome guys and girls at Lloyd's TSB. I had a 3-week induction there, which I'd never experienced. The training team just seemed so cool. They, had the best job. Everybody had such a positive experience of it. And whilst I was at Lloyd's TSB, I was a team leader there. I went on a training course for coaching and feedback when I was made team leader on the phones department. And it was that moment that really struck me that this is what I want to do for a job. But Gokul, before that even moment, I thought, I can't believe that this is a job. The trainer, Robin Fenner, who's still a good friend today, was in front of the room, and he was inspiring. He was leading the room. It blew me away. And so I knew right then that that's what I wanted to do. And so I helped out a little bit at Lloyd's TSB before I thought that I'd like to go and do this as a full-time job. And so unfortunately, I had to leave Lloyd's TSB to do that. I joined a small division of NatWest. When writing checks was a thing, that's what we did there. That we were part of the check processing and check fraud part. So I was writing courses on how to spot check fraud, which was a great thing to be sharing with people. And of course, it was solving a real problem, which I suppose was the genesis of what I'm all about right now. That there was a real problem with check fraud, and so we had to create simulations that helped the people processing those checks to spot it. So that was a huge part for me. I wanted to then join a bigger training team because I was just the only training person at this division in NatWest. So I joined a bigger team at Lehman Brothers. That was different because the culture didn't really work for me. I think that the culture itself has been found out since. But after only a year there, I joined Disney. And when talking about the role of learning and development, solving real problems, I'll tell you, Gokul, that going from finance and banking to media and entertainment was a huge jump, and I didn't like it, and I wanted to leave within 3 months. It just wasn't me. But luck played a part. My boss left I was asked to take over from my boss. It was something I didn't want to say no to. And 8 years later, there I was running learning and development for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. So it worked out, really well. And without going into the details, that's a potted history. I'm sure we'll get into what that actually entailed and the seminal moments as we go.
Yeah, David. From that entire story so far, two things I got it. One, you love risks. You just like jumping into things and then figuring out what happens over there. And yeah, banking to entertainment industry to a startup. I mean, L&D is the common factor, but dynamics is completely different for each of these organizations, right?
Yeah. Completely different. Yeah. You can't understate it. I see sometimes conversations on LinkedIn where people are clearly disgruntled because the jobs that they're going for are asking for sector experience, and people saying, well, why is this so important? And people who haven't done it saying it's not important, but it is an enormous factor. I've never worked in an organization where the culture maps to another one that I've been to. And as far as the sectors were concerned, even Disney, you mentioned in your introduction that the Disney at the time was like 14 different businesses, each with a different culture. There was obviously there was the Disney Store, which was all about creating experiences. Then there might have been ad sales. They sell advertising to broadcasters. That's not like running a store. And then you had ABC, which was a part of it as well, and they're journalists. So yeah, and then there was ESPN as well, which was sports journalism and broadcasting. Those four didn't associate themselves with the others. They were very different cultures, and I think that it takes both a respect of that to even begin to understand, but there is a really quite a jarring effect. And you've got to think of the hiring manager as well. You say that I'm risky, but hiring managers aren't usually afforded risks. You hire for somebody you think is best placed to do that job. And when you think that somebody hasn't been in your sector, the chances are it's going to be a while, if at all, that they do make that transition. And so we want to limit the risks within our hiring, but learning and development can play, and I'm sure we will talk about this, can play a crucial part in unpacking culture and making it accessible, whereas too often it's not accessible and people are left to flounder when there's a key problem there to be solved.
Yeah, love that point, really. I mean, learning and development unfolding the culture of an organization. I mean, really awesome. And so, David, I'm really curious about how the setup was in Disney. 14 different divisions that you're managing, and you must be creating a plethora of content for each of them, and so many different directions of content and types as well. Can you paint a picture? What exactly was it? What was happening there?
Yeah, so first of all, I wasn't creating content for 14 different ones. I'll let you in on a secret, Gokul, but don't tell anybody else. What I was looking for were commonalities across the board. First of all, there was the onboarding experience. Before anybody reached their line manager, we had an opportunity to provide them with a consistent experience. And I don't like that term, that consistent experience. I think we should be solving different problems to consistency, but go with it for a moment. This is what we did. They had a consistent experience at the beginning where we could welcome them to the company. And then we also ran an event called Welcome to Disney, which was a day of presentations, which wasn't about you fully understanding what was going on within the organization, but it was to paint a picture and to let you know that right now is a very exciting time to be joining the organization. So we would have those 14 divisions present for half an hour on what was going on. And Gokul, it was teaser videos. It was trailers for movies that weren't out yet. It was video snippets of stores, like reimagining what the stores were. And it was all about people feeling that they would join. This was the company for them, which in the earlier stages, you are trying to engender some kind of loyalty. I mean, it's the bedrock of engagement to let people know that they've made the right decision. We'd also then have email prompts to line managers to check in with people over those 3 months, and of course there was the probation. So we had these what are termed. Recently on my podcast, I interviewed Gabe Gloger from ETS, and he called these evergreen problems for L&D. You've got induction, you've got new manager development, you've got some career management elements as well. They're not going away. They need solving for the whole organization. And then what I would do is I then looked for the themes that run across the organization that would touch as many of those lines of business as we possibly could. So we introduced a mentoring program and felt that it was of benefit. If we were looking at that time, we just appointed a president for all of Europe to run as a managing director for the whole Europe business. And so we were thinking, if his vision was one voice, one vision for this unified organization, then mentoring that paired people from across the organization was a way of helping to connect people with different experiences and then plug them in at a different level, so that they could have conversations with people who were already walking in the shoes that they would hopefully be fulfilling later. So we had a mentoring program, and we ran a learning conference each year as well, which was more aimed at bringing ideas from the outside. Disney at the time, a criticism could be that it was very insular. It would look internally for all its ideas, where this was about bringing ideas and emerging concepts from outside. And again, you're looking for that thread. It wasn't going to meet every need, but with 3 people in a team supporting 4,500 people, you are looking for ways of touching as many people as you could. And then we ran our standard programs. There was access to the global LMS, so there was consistency. And then I'd be consulting with the business leaders on bespoke areas where I might be launching, say, a learning conference, and then my team would take it over and run that the next year. So I'd then be consulting with business leaders on what was keeping them up at night and trying to help move things along in their way. So Gokul, learning and development sometimes looks like from the outside, it's about creating content and programs that are either generic or bespoke, but internally you're looking to positively affect the employee journey on the evergreen elements, and then positively affect the business with leaders' priorities as well.
Absolutely. And, it's really interesting. I mean, this is the first time I'm hearing about a learning conference within an organization just to ensure that the program sticks with the entire employees. I mean, that's really interesting. Right. And so let's say if you're going to split it into multiple parts, right, there is definitely the leadership or the mentoring program and all of that, just for making sure the soft skills actually get better over time. And then there would be the onboarding aspect, the training aspect. What about the software bit, right? Is that also something that you guys were handling? Because, there are so many parallel threads here. And like you said, it's a huge, 4,500 people that you're training over there. So how was it? And what was the structure like, or what kind of activities were there for each of these parts of, let's say, L&D?
So as far as helping to provide people with the guidance and support they needed for the software, I think that the biggest learning curve was in the internal legacy systems. So whether it be bought or built for Disney, it was how to use, say, the CRM or the customer relationship management software, or it might have been in there was a particular area that supported the content distribution teams. They had bespoke software. So a lot of the time people were learning that stuff from colleagues and cheat sheets. I will admit that what I think was the biggest waste of money that I think we ever did at Disney was Excel training. So we talk about software. I can't tell you how many times I was asked for refresher training for Excel because it didn't stick. On reflection, what we should have done is had people record screen recordings with a voiceover saying, this is how we use this here. Like say, for example, you've got budget holders in across the entire organization. When you become a manager and a budget holder, you have these responsibilities for forecasting, for reforecasting, your quarterly check-ins with your finance representative, and then closing off your end of year budget. And then reforecasting again. So we would be sending people on Excel training so that they could get used to the spreadsheets. They didn't need that. What they needed was to say, you are now a budget holder. These are your responsibilities. This is the spreadsheet we'll be using. You fill it in like this. And, you know, and I think that this is a common problem within learning and development. We assume people have no knowledge or next to no knowledge. We assume then that they need all the knowledge, and then we build them a course or provide them an opportunity to learn it all. And I just don't think it's necessary. And so we used to partner with a software training provider, and we'd be sending people on courses to learn everything they can about software. And we also had an exhaustive library of Microsoft Office training videos on the LMS as well. You know, it was all focused on educating people on how to become competent at basic level, intermediate level, and then a proficient level of capability, but without ever trying to understand their jobs. And I think that perhaps part of my crusade here is trying to undo what I'd done previously. It's harder, more expensive, and less effective to just be buying stuff off the shelf without doing the analysis. It is easier, less risky, and more effective to cut the chunks out that you need, or to understand the job and do a quick resource and share. It's, I'm all for good curated content. If you've got a good library of good content, but I don't think it means anything unless you put that in a wrapper of, this is how you'll use this here. That, going back to culture, what I mentioned earlier, Gokul, like, how do you unpack the culture? You spend some time understanding what it is that people are expected to do, solving the problems with them to help them to become more effective or more efficient at what it is that they're trying to do, and look at ways to automate that as much as you can, so you haven't got people asking for and then attending refresher training or searching an LMS. It's actually there when they need it to do the stuff they're expected to do, and then they move on.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you brought it up. I mean, that's exactly that we also keep preaching about learning in the flow of work, or learning by doing, right? And that's what works. I mean, like, say, we are a digital adoption platform, and this whole show is all about, let's say, talking to leaders who has come from different wakes of life, and again, different larger enterprises where the system is everywhere different, and this is the one common thread which is there across everywhere: learning by doing, learning in the flow of work. There is no one size fits all for any activity that you do. You have to make it curated for people. You have to make it more actionable, and they should be able to consume and do it the way they think they would do better at it. Right. Ultimately. And, that brings me to another thought process. Again, Disney was way before the pandemic, and you were handling a team across EMEA, right? I mean, there was UK, there was Europe, you mentioned Africa and Middle East as well, right? So how was the remote learning then? Right. And this was a way before that, right? How was the entire L&D structured in a remote learning setup?
Right. So again, I'll let you in a little secret, Gokul, seeing it's just you and I. One of the reasons I left Disney is that I was so frustrated with the technology infrastructure. The LMS was dreadful. I remember moving from Lehman Brothers to Disney and thinking, right, I'm going to see Pixar quality e-learning. Now, I don't know what that meant, but I thought that they would have some way of having it engaging enough that people would want to use it. And they had this, and in the end, Disney had a clunky LMS that took far too long to find anything, and there was no pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. The e-learning was dreadful. So when you say about remote learning, the learning and development team at all levels through the organization were deluded in thinking that the online offering was solving any problems at all. What I think remote learning really meant to employees at Disney was come 2006, 2007, they had access to Google and YouTube, which had matured to such an extent that they could find out what they needed when they needed it. And as years went on, it became easier and easier as those platforms increased with content and their improved their usability. But I don't think personally that Disney's online, well, I left in 2014, that Disney's technology infrastructure helped at all with what people were expected to do. But I will also caveat that with Gokul that I still speak with learning and development professionals who were in the same boat as I was 8 years ago, because they buy silver bullet solutions. It's just the latest version of what we were using before, fill it full of generic content, and they think that it's enough. But they haven't done any analysis. The content relates not a jot to what people do. It doesn't help people with the culture, and they still try to drive engagement. And so the biggest problem that learning and development professionals have with online solutions right now, or remote learning solutions, as you phrased it in the question, is that people don't use it. And it's not that they don't know how to learn, and it's not that they don't have time. It's because they know that it won't deliver them the value. There's no point in trying to look through generic content that they know doesn't relate to what they're expected to do within the organization. They might as well Google it. So I'd say that when we were supporting people in the other offices at Disney, in the major countries, France, Germany, Italy, Spain and Portugal, there was a dedicated HR team with a learning and development element. And then there were members of my team that went and serviced the more remote areas and would spend time, say, in South Africa or in the Middle East and some of the smaller countries in delivering face-to-face. Now, I do not believe that you can upskill a workforce one class at a time. But we were so hamstrung by our technology solutions, we had next to no option. Again, it's one of the reasons I left, because I couldn't fulfill my role there by thinking that we could deliver our way out of the problems that the Walt Disney Company was facing from an employee development perspective. And I thought that was a problem that needed to be solved from outside that organization.
So is that why you think, okay, when I need to go into a startup, start solving problems from ground up first, right? I mean, was that the decision, how you moved from an enterprise into a complete, let's say 360 learning and loop? And is that how it happened?
Yeah, so I'd say it was a fluke of timing. I met Ben Mazel from Loop in 2014 when he brought a beta version of Loop to the CIPD show in London. He was the first stand I went to. I'd never heard of Loop before. And so I asked him, like, what does Loop do? He showed me, and Gokul, no word of a lie, my words back to Ben were, that's the first piece of learning technology I've ever seen that I would use as a learner. And it was a huge moment for me, because before then I was pushing e-learning thinking maybe this one will get used, or creating SharePoint fascias on the front of the clunky LMS at Disney to try to lure people in. And if they got in, then maybe they'd want to use it again. And they didn't. But Loop was very different. The way that you could rapidly create content, you could package it up to solve real problems. Ben and I talked for a year. He'd phone me and say, look, we've got this idea, if we configured the platform this way, how do you think it would work? And every time I was like, oh my God, this actually solves the induction problem. And then, but another thing they were working on, and that was me saying, well, that fixes the compliance problem. All the problems pretty much coming from people aren't going to use it. So if people aren't going to use it, then you can't affect performance. So therefore, you've given up trying to affect performance. You just want to drive traffic to justify the investment. That's my life in-house with technology. And after a year of talking to them, Ben asked me whether I'd like to join the team, seeing as I was doing it for free prior to that. So I moved from their biggest fan to the first employee. at Loop, and from there we just continued that journey. And I think the reason we became so successful was that we always checked ourselves: would this solve the problem that David was trying to solve at Disney? And that was it. And this is where I think a lot of platforms go wrong. A lot of platforms try to solve the engagement problem. No one's using it. So what do? Well, we'll make it more entertaining. We'll make it more interactive. We'll make the Netflix of learning because people can't come off Netflix. So Gokul, the whole industry went crazy trying to solve the people won't use it problem. And again, I'd let you in on a little secret, Gokul. It's really easy to solve the engagement problem. You need to give people what they actually need, and they determine that when they actually need it. And all of a sudden, you've got no engagement problem. But if you give people what you think they need at a time it's convenient to you, guess what? It doesn't work, right? So learning and development have gone headlong down this path of edutainment and new and novel delivery mechanisms, whilst the employee has been trying to figure out themselves how to solve the same problems that been solved thousands of times in your organization. L&D should be on the other side, if you hadn't have guessed.
That's a lot of secrets, David. Awesome. All right. And moving ahead on the podcast, right? And, I'm a fan of the podcast, right? And it's called the Learning and Development Podcast. I mean, it can't be any simpler.
Gokul, it was great advice by Nick Bradley in the first place that got me involved. It was my love of podcasts, my risk at putting myself out there and thinking that I might be able to give this a go, and then the good fortune that my friends in learning and development let me prove the concept, and here we are 3 years later.
And 3 years and how many episodes?
So we're approaching 100 now.
Oh, wow. Wow. So that's like a lot of knowledge, right? I mean, I don't know. It's a shameless plug, I would say. People listening to this, listen to Learning and Development Podcast and also the previous episodes of Digital Adoption Show. There's a lot of knowledge there. Right. Awesome. And it's interesting that, David, so many people on the show also has talked about how Bob Mosher has, inspired them. And, the community itself is so closely knit that, okay, fine. We know that these people are known for something. So we've hosted Bob Mosher, Britt Andrietta, the information that they bring out on each and every conversation. It's new, it's really compelling. And you just walk out saying that, okay, I have something new, actionable thing to do. It's really incredible. Awesome. And, coming from that conversation into the community angle, right? Now, the podcast definitely is helping build that collective knowledge. Now, you've also ventured into building a community, right? L&D Collective, right? Yeah. So what is that about? I mean, what is it community, and, how are you planning to scale it up, or the impact that you can create with the community?
Yeah. So what I found with the engagements I've had with the podcast and the social sharing that we've had is that learning and development people coming forward and saying, can I talk to you about my situation? Because, we could talk about concepts and how it works elsewhere, but people want to talk about how it works with them. And I think that there's real power in looking for the ways in which you can have organic conversations, because within a community, an active community, you've got the opportunity for people to build the camaraderie and say, look, I'm working on this, I'm trying to solve this problem. Other people stand up and saying, hey, I'm trying to solve that problem as well. But then you have the other added benefit of people saying, hey, I've already worked on that. So I think the real value, and what I try to bring to the podcast, first of all, is the experience of people who have actually done this in organizations and they couldn't run away from the solution. I think learning and development happens inside organizations and we are on the outside. We can provide some inspiration. Sometimes we can supply some insight, and sometimes we can provide some working know-how. And bringing a community together of people who are responsible for learning and development within organizations just helps to strengthen the people's ability to both try stuff that works and also be inspired by people who are perhaps a few steps ahead, or maybe even on a different territory altogether from where they are. So the idea is that if you can encourage, first of all, bring people together so that they feel as if they belong to something that is bigger than us. And again, like Gokul, so many learning and development functions are small, largely because we can't prove the value of what we do. And there are lots of 1 and 2 person learning and development teams. There are some other ones. Sebastian Tindall talks about him growing the size of his learning and development team because they can demonstrate the value of what they do aligned to business objectives. So that maybe that's a different that's an aside there, maybe for a different podcast episode between the two of us. But there's power in bringing people together where a lot of the time we feel small, and that what we're trying to do in the way you described earlier, how do you support 14 lines of business across 30 different countries with only 3 people? It's very hard. But I had mentors. I had a large network. In the 8 years since I left in-house, things have moved on to such an extent that we can support each other with communities, and so it represents something bigger than the teams that we all belong in. But we also look to explore ways in which we can still provide one-to-one time and bespoke opportunities. Like within the L&D Collective, we run a monthly office hours where we pick a pressing topic, or what we do generally is we organisers pick 3 topics that we think are important right now. We put it out to the community to upvote which ones they'd like discussed. I turn up, I talk about my experience on that thing, just to warm everyone up, just to know it's a safe space to come and have a chat. Then we invite people on, up and to say, what's your experience of this? What's the problem you're trying to solve? We have a conversation. That then builds on people with the comments. Somebody else jumps up. And so what we try to do is we just try to build momentum around a particular topic, see if we can create something useful. It's videoed, and then we send it out. We also look to do lunch and learns. We've done them in Paris, in New York. We've got one in a couple of weeks in London as well, where we bring people together, because the online community starts as one thing, which is a list of people within a Slack group, but then we look for different ways in which we can engage that group in ways that continue to be valuable throughout. So look, there's loads of benefit of us working together, and I think it's the responsibility of us who want to pull this together to continue to seek to try to eke out opportunities to demonstrate more and more value to the people who've given up their time to join us.
Yep, awesome. I think in this podcast we've covered so many different avenues where you can learn more. I mean, you can actually find people. We can talk to the people who have done so many things in different amazing organizations, right? Yeah. I hope the listeners actually listen it again and reach out ultimately, right, and start talking.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Right. So I'll come towards the end of the podcast right now, and I have a rapid fire, a few questions, on the top of the mind, whatever comes in, you can just blurt it out, and then we'll close the podcast. So all ready, David?
Absolutely. Let's go.
Awesome. Right. So let's say people who both you and I should host. Anyone on the top of the mind?
What I would say, if it's not people, I'd say get people who work in learning and development to come on. The best conversations I've had are those people on the front line making waves. I've loved talking to Tracy Waters when she was at Sky. I've loved talking to Sebastian Tindall, Anne-Marie Burbidge, to name but a few. Ross Stevenson, people who are not just trying different things, but holding themselves accountable to actual results. And I'd also say Nick Shackleton-Jones, because if you want truth bombs, I don't think that there's anyone better.
And that's really interesting. I mean, we just booked on the podcast with Ross Stevenson. That's happening.
Yeah.
Amazing. Right now, you've been handling too many things. I mean, you have 360 Learning, you have Loop, you have a podcast, you have a community. So what does your daily routine look like?
Oh, look, I'm very fortunate. I would say that my time is all about connecting. So I'd say I'm at my most ready and productive in the mornings. So I would generally be writing or creating. I try to commit a monthly piece to Forbes. So I generally will do some writing in the morning. I'll spend some time on LinkedIn, having a look to see who's saying and sharing some interesting stuff, because I'm always looking for a guest for the podcast. I could be catching up with the team. The team at 360 are 10 times the size of the team we had at Loop. So there's plenty of connecting going on. And then certainly very recently, I've been guesting on different podcasts. I've been recording many podcasts. Later towards the end of the day, I found myself on hosting webinars. We try to at 360 host webinars where we can reach as much of the globe as we can, and so that will often happen in the afternoon. Again, I've got a couple of those coming up this week. So look, I'd say it's a huge amount of fun because if it's not talking to people, then I'm looking for other ways to connect. Plan and prepare. I don't think there are too many other jobs where you have as much fun as I do.
Awesome. Now, 3 must-listen podcasts. I mean, you listen to a lot of them. What are the 3 must-listen podcasts?
Right. So these would be affected by my recency bias, I'm sure. I have been hugely enjoying John Helmer and Donald Clark's Great Minds on Learning podcast. I love Michelle Ocker's Learning Uncut podcast, again, because she speaks to people on the front line doing learning and development. And I would say, let's see, maybe a curveball. I mentioned it earlier, Today in Focus. I think that there's nothing quite like understanding the global context to what it is that we're trying to do. So we could all do with looking outside of learning and development a little bit.
Awesome. And the last question there. So if there was a conversation that you'd like to recall that shaped the L&D professional in you, be it in the podcast or anything before, what would that be?
So a conversation, one that had the biggest effect, I would go to. I thoroughly enjoyed my conversation with Tracy Waters at Sky. I think that what Tracy was bold enough to do and had the courage of her conviction, she went all in on Agile because she challenged her and her team to do learning and development that actually works. She burnt the house down of the old way of doing L&D, so there was no way of going back, and she made one hell of a difference. She's one of the most inspirational learning and development leaders I've met, and I'd say that conversation continues to reverberate and resonate with me.
Awesome. All right, David, I think, that's it. I think I'll stop there. And this was a really fun conversation. I really learned a lot. And, this was just enjoyable.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks, Gokul.
So before we close, David, it'd be awesome if you could share, how do people find you, or where do people find you rather?
Well, you mentioned at the Learning and Development podcast. They can find me on LinkedIn as well. I'm always peppering people's feeds on LinkedIn, and so David James, and on Twitter I'm David in Learning. Awesome.
All right, so end of yet another episode of the Digital Adoption Show. And thanks, David. Once again, it's been amazing. And it's a pleasure hosting you at the Digital Adoption Show. Right, so everyone listening to the podcast, stay tuned to the Digital Adoption Show for more great content and some really incredible speakers. Right, and have a great one.